I was sitting here thinking about the Democrat presidential candidates are now in, North Carolina and South Carolina, and they're doing their political pitches, to black people, black Americans in those southern states. And when you read the article, it tells you that the majority of their voter base, black people, are in those states. Okay, and I just started to thinking about history, because I read a lot of history because I love history. And one thing, even when I was growing up, that struck me that I couldn't quite understand was, after slavery was abolished, and of course that was in the South. The Civil War took place to free the slaves in the South. The slaves that were in the other parts of the country had already been freed without a war. I mean, it was just somebody signed some paperwork and they were gone, and it ended it. But the South would not just give up their slaves, so we had to go to basically war to get the slaves freed in the South. Now, after those slaves were free, they were called freedmen. And a lot of the slaves, did leave and migrate to the north. But a lot of the black people, freed slaves, remained in the South. And I could never understand that, even as a child, because as soon as the slaves were legally free, the first thing that the Democrat Party did was enact laws to, on the books, legal laws to like Jim Crow laws and black codes and all kind of things to keep black people still basically beneath them. That's basically what they were trying to do. They were not going to tolerate these free black people being on the same level as them. So they put laws on the books for that. They also, black people didn't have anything. And another reason I couldn't understand why all the blacks didn't just leave is because they had nothing to lose anyway. And a lot of times when I would ask that question, how come all the blacks didn't leave? Because you've been enslaved and these people have no respect for you. Why would you remain there? And a lot of the blacks would say, well, that was their home. And that's what they were not going to leave their home. But to me, they had nothing anyway. So if you have nothing, what do you have to lose by leaving? You didn't really have a home. So, but that was the argument. Well, that was their home. So the ones that did stay there, they end up being sharecroppers, or basically for the white man, and basically it was slaves because they had a little shack on the property and they worked the crops and all for the white man. But when it was all over with, they still didn't have anything. They ended up owing, more. It was just unfair, basically. So a lot of black people remained in the South. Now, a lot of them did migrate to the North. Now, people say, well, it was racism in the North too. And then, it's true, but they were not on the books. They had to do theirs more undercover or whatever they could, but they did not have a law on the books to say you cannot do this and you cannot do that based on your race. They didn't have separate drinking fountains, legal ones. They might have had them, and people just understood. Because I've watched a lot of documentaries, and they say, we understood. And when we went up north, the blacks went up north. It wasn't on the books, but you just understood, your place or whatever. But they still had way more freedoms and things and opportunities up north than they did in the South. So a lot of the things happened to the black people in the South, and it was done by the Democrat Party. Okay. Now we go to the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement is not even that long ago. The Civil Rights Act was not even enacted until 64. That's 54 years ago. That's not that long ago. And of course, the Democrats fought that. They keep saying, a Democrat president signed the Civil Rights Act, but it was the Republicans that pushed it through and voted for it. It was Democrats that, filibustered it. So anyway, I've done a video on the history of the Civil Rights Act and how it even came into play. Every Civil Rights Act bill that was ever initiated was by a Republican. And even Lyndon Johnson couldn't get the Civil Rights Act through his own Congress. He had the majority in the House and the Senate, and he couldn't get it through. He had to go to the minority Senate leader to get it even through Congress, to get it voted on and anything. But so you have a party, and this was just 54 years ago, a Democrat Party who never denied being Democrats. Because when you bring these things up to black people, they say the party switched, which never happened. Okay, the party never switched, and they can't tell you when. But you just think, just 54 years ago, and 60 years ago, they were turning water holes. The Democrat Party were turning water holes on the black people. They were sicking dogs on them, and they admitted to being Democrats. They didn't try to claim they were anything but Democrats. They were proud Democrats doing all these things. They were standing by the school door and wouldn't let the black people, when they tried to integrate the schools. Those people were Democrats. They did not deny being Democrats. This is 60 years ago, 65 years ago. So that has not been that long ago. And a lot of times I would hear black people say, even when I was growing up, it wasn't too long ago we had to sit at the back of the bus. Wasn't that long ago. And they were telling the truth. But it was the Democrat Party that did that. They would leave that part out. They would always leave out the part who it was that caused them to be in that situation. They talk about it, but they wouldn't. So that brings me to John Lewis. People like John Lewis. He's, I think he's Georgia. I think is his a district somewhere in Georgia. He's in the House of Representatives. Now he's a black man, and he always touts marching in the civil rights movement. He always touts how he got beat up and kicked and all on that bridge in Selma when they did that march. He was beat. I was beat. They kicked me. They beat me. The stormtroopers did that to him. He knows that. But they were Democrats. He knows that too. He knows that the Democrat Party was the ones kicking and beating him on that bridge. But yet he turned around and joined that same party. I can't understand that. If I ever had a chance, and I know he's sick right now, he has cancer, but if I ever had a chance to sit down and talk with him, I would ask him, why? Because you always talk about the civil rights movement and how you were abused. How could you turn around and join your abusers? I don't understand that. But that's exactly what John Lewis did. He joined the same party that he touts how he uses. He doesn't say who the party is. They never say that. When they talk about what happened to them, they never said the Democrats did this to us. And I wonder why. But they don't do that. So now let's go on. Let's go up to the 90s. The 90s when Bill Clinton was in office. Now, I've always told you I've never been a Democrat. I've always been a Republican. But back in the 90s, I was a Republican, but I wasn't that much into following the politics. What laws had been passed and all that. And we didn't have the internet at that time either. So the only significant bills that I remember paying attention to that Bill Clinton signed was the welfare reform. And the only reason he signed that bill was because it was a Republican Senate and they forced him to sign that welfare reform. But I didn't even know about the 1994 crime bill until 2015 when Hillary started running for president. And then I started thinking, I said, well, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that Bill Clinton, the one that all the black people loved, before Obama came on the scene, black people loved Bill Clinton. They loved him. So it was him that signed a bill that sent all of these black men and some women to prison for years, for nonviolent drug crimes. Now, I've heard for years black people complaining about mass incarceration, but they never talked about how it happened. So I didn't even know how it happened. I'm just going to be honest. But there was always mass incarceration. So then during the 2015 and 16 leading up to the election, that came out. And I just could not believe it. I'm saying, you mean to tell me that black people were this in love with Bill Clinton, knowing that he was the one that did this to them? Now you think about that. That sounds like, who loves their abusers? John Lewis, he loved his abusers. He joined his abusers. And then he turned around so he could get power. So you have a Democrat president that is, loved and worshipped. Bill Clinton was like that before Obama came on the scene by black people, but he was the one that signed it. And then I think about the people that were the black people that were in Congress at the time who were Democrats. Maxine Waters, she was in 94. She was in the House, because I remember her way back when Rodney King was at 92. She was around then. So the 94 crime bill, she was around. Okay, where were all these congressional black caucuses when Joe Biden, which was in the Senate at the time, wrote this bill and it got passed and signed? I didn't hear any Democrats, to my knowledge, black Democrats, complaining and going against Bill Clinton for signing this bill into law. I don't remember anything about it. I did hear them complain about the welfare reform because, of course, they didn't want that. It was a good bill. And like I said, Clinton was forced to sign it because of the Republicans had the majority. But I heard some of the congressional black caucuses complaining about that. But I never heard anybody say anything about the 1994 crime bill. Okay, now, I'm not saying that people that do drugs or sell drugs should not have been arrested or, pay some time for it because it's illegal. But these are nonviolent crimes. They did not commit an armed robbery where that's with a weapon. They did not beat anybody. There was no violence involved. They were just selling drugs. Okay, I understand that. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have gotten any time. 2 or 3 years maybe. But these people were getting years, decades under this new bill. Alex Johnson, she basically almost had life. She had already done 26 years when President Trump commuted her sentence and let her go. A Hispanic lady that got, I guess, commuted. Yeah, her sentence got commuted. She had already served 12 years. And then when you read her story, she got caught up in some drug selling, but they said she only had maybe a joint or something in her pocket. So people's lives were ruined. And I didn't hear any black congressman or anybody complaining about this. They sat back and allowed their president of their party to abuse their own people. Okay, so then who comes around? President Donald Trump, a Republican, again, rescuing black people by trying to reverse that. And it did. He reversed his First Step Act, prison reform, reversed what Clinton signed into law. So you got a Republican Lincoln freeing the slaves. You got the Republican Party basically passing the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 65. That was all initiated by Republicans. Then you come years later and you have Donald Trump freeing black people again, coming to the black people's rescue again. This happens over and over again. The Democrats enslave you some kind of way. They hold you back some kind of way. They discriminate legally, people. This has all been done legally by the Democrat Party. Then here comes the Republican freeing you. Yet, black people are still in the South mainly. Because what was so discouraging to me when I read this, because even to this day, the highest concentration of black people, are still in the South. And you think, okay, all these horrible things happen to black people in the South, and the highest concentration of black people is still the South. Now, I don't understand that. Now, if you're going to stay in the South, at least look at your history and figure out, okay, why am I still voting for these people? So not only have the black people clung to their abusers, they're not getting anything out of the abusers. This is the part I don't understand. They can't point to any policy that the Democrats have done for black people to help black people. Every one of the policies that the Democrat Party has put in place harmed black people, discriminated against black people some kinds of way, all the way up to 1994. So I'm sitting back trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, I can't understand what's going on. If this is not, and they get mad when you say plantation and slavery. They don't want to talk about slavery if they can somehow, use it to their benefit. But when you start telling them they're still slaves, black people that vote Democrat on the plantation, they get angry. But you explain to me, what could that be when you continue to vote and be loyal to your abusers? And this is facts. This is nothing made up. What do you call that? What do you call that? So you got these black preachers. Now, see, a lot of this comes from the black ministers, and I've said this. Not all black pastors, but all of this racism and keeping black people voting Democrat is the result of going to church every Sunday, listening to a black pastor tell you all kind of lies. Al Sharpton had this breakfast And who sponsored it? Had it at a black church, and all the black religious leaders were there. See, these are the leaders that go back every Sunday and preach against the Republicans and Donald Trump and this, and they ignore. They ignore. Like one of my Facebook friends said that, he made a comment. He says, I was in church today and all they talked about was Donald Trump. He said they didn't mention that there's a homosexual running for the presidency. They didn't mention there's a racist, Bloomberg, running. He said the pastor, a black pastor, didn't mention any of those people. All he was talking about was Donald Trump. And he said, and I said, see, you tell me something's not wrong right here. So these all-white Democrat presidential candidates are in North Carolina, had this breakfast yesterday, pitching and pandering to the black people because the religious leaders was there. So yeah, and then some of them up, and the whole time these presidential candidates are on stage talking to these black people, they're accusing President Trump of being a racist. They've ignored the black leaders, so-called pastors have ignored the prison reform and the First Step Act. They've ignored all that. These bills help black people, their people. I'm sure they have people in their congregation who have family members that were caught up in this crime bill. And a lot of them have been freed. Over 90% of the people that's been freed have been black people. How do you have black leaders, so-called pastors, not say that, not bring that up to their people, and keep telling their people, you vote for a Democrat no matter what? If it's a Christian pastor, supposedly, you vote for a homosexual, because it doesn't matter who gets the nomination. Those black pastors are going to tell their congregation, you vote for him. I don't care who it is, you vote for him. So I just can't understand that. I remember this, and then I'll be finished. When Bill Clinton left the White House, I remember he tried to get an office, I think on Fifth Avenue, somewhere in New York City, but it was like an expensive area. Like it wasn't Wall Street, but I think it was like Fifth Avenue. And people said that's cost too much money because see, taxpayers pay for the president's office space. And it was all over the media how much, because, real estate on Fifth Avenue is expensive. So he had to back out of that. That was his first choice. So then he decided to put his office in Harlem. And I would never forget the day that he opened his office in Harlem. And all these black people was just standing around him and grinning. And he loves us. And they were just grinning. And I was thinking to myself, don't these people know that that was his second choice? He didn't choose Harlem right off the bat. He ended up in Harlem after he couldn't get what he wanted on Fifth Avenue. But the black people were surrounding him and just grinning. And I thought, oh my God. I remember I was at Edwards Air Force Base. And I was standing in line at the checkout at the BX, Base Exchange. And there was this black lady in front of me. And she had to be in her 40s at the time. She had a teenage daughter with her. And this was like right after. It was like, 2001. After, Bill Clinton was no longer in office. Bush was in office. And she must have saw something on the stand, the newsstand or whatever. And this is what this grown woman said. She says, you know who I miss? I miss Bill so much. I miss Bill. And she was talking about Bill Clinton. And I'm looking at, is this woman crazy? Who talks like this about somebody? She acted like that was her husband or something, that she really knew him. And I just couldn't believe that. But that's the love and affection the black people had for Bill Clinton, even after he signed that 1994 crime bill. I had family members that talked about Bill Clinton, we just love him. He comes and he eats. I said, well, okay, what has he done for you? Can somebody tell me one thing Bill Clinton did for black people? Nobody had an answer. All they would say is he loved us because he hung around us and he came and ate soul food with us. And that he wanted to be around us. This is what they said to me. So tonight I just wanted to rant because I just thought, come on. Black people in the South are still, no matter everything that happened to them, discrimination, slavery, whatever, all happened to them in the South, all happened to them by the Democrat Party, and yet and still, that right now, they're the highest concentration voter base in the South, black people, for the Democrat Party. I want somebody to explain that to me if you can. Have a blessed day.